Thank you so much for sharing this. We need to move to another session, and another roundtable will be on the topic of investment trends and has anything changed in life sciences and healthcare. And the discussion will be moderated by Stephaine Marrus. And Stephaine is a director of the Entrepreneurship Center at the University of California. Stephaine Marrus is a director of the Entrepreneurship Center of the University of California, San Francisco, and she has built an extensive program whose mission to build the university entrepreneurial ecosystem and start companies from UCSF technologies. And the discussion will be joined by Jack Knowles, VP Venture Investments at Bayer. And Bayer, as you all know, is a global enterprise with core competencies in the life sciences and healthcare and agriculture, as well as Bob Moore, MBA Managing Director at Ulta Partners. And Bob Moore brings over 20 years of life sciences investing experience, and as well as Robert Blajez, PhD partner at Mission Bay Capital. And he's a passionate biotechnologist with a diverse skill set. And I hope that we'll see amazing talk here. And welcome on stage, Stephaine.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to the stage. So while we're waiting for our moderator, Stephaine, getting online. He was here earlier, I just saw her. So maybe we can ask our panelists to do a very quick intro about yourself. We start with Jake.
Sure. Hi, can you guys see and hear me?
Very good, very good.
Great. So hi everyone, I'm Jack Knowles. I'm an MD by training. I work with the venture arm of Bayer called Leaps by Bayer. Leaps, as you point out, covers all three verticals of Bayer. So we invest in crop science, consumer health, as well as pharmaceuticals. I primarily focus on pharmaceutical side of things. I'm still on one crop science board, but hope to be rotating off shortly. Leaps has really started to invest in next generation technologies. So we do a lot in the cell and gene therapy space. Recently, we've closed deals, Century Therapeutics last year, as well as a few on the protein engineering side, ProTech technology with DuPont Therapeutics and Arvinas. So my view is that we're looking to do more deals in the cell and gene therapy space, and excited to be part of that team.
Go ahead, maybe Robert.
Yeah, hi, nice to be here today. Robert Blajez, I'm a partner at Mission Bay Capital and Mission Bio Capital, and also director of MBC Biolabs. So Mission Bay Capital invests in life science broadly, and we have a unique venture model where we use a network of incubators, life science incubators that we run nationally as a way to both support entrepreneurs, help them get their company off the ground, and then we get to know companies through our incubator, sort of an extended diligence that we do. Right now, we have over 30 companies nationally that are working on COVID-19 related projects, with 350 companies throughout our biolabs network. My background's in genetics and genomics, and I originally came to investing by founding a company out of the original biolabs here in San Francisco.
And I'm not sure.
Hey, Bob, it's you now.
Great, I'm not sure how this works and not sure if you can hear me or see me.
Very good.
Great, so I'm Bob Moore, I'm with Ulta Partners. Ulta is sort of a restart of Ulta Partners. It's called Ulta Next Gen now. Small venture fund, we do life sciences and tech-enabled healthcare delivery. Largely comes out of the results of my spending some time at the Gates Foundation looking for areas that were scalable and can transform borders. So drugs, curative therapeutics, and then tech-enabled healthcare delivery. And I've been doing venture capital for roughly 20-something years. So I'm not sure if we have Stephaine on here yet.
Doesn't look like we do.
Okay, I'll help. This is David. Welcome aboard. I appreciate everybody's participation in the summit. We'll help Stephaine to fill in the first question. Is that we are talking about life science investment. So maybe each of you can share your viewpoint about the current trends, particularly in the wake of the pandemic. What type of things changed in the life science? Great.
I think I'm finally on. I've been frozen out. Apologies, everyone. It's technology. Thank you, David. So, hello, panel. I'm glad you had a chance to introduce yourselves. Everyone can hear me, I take it? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. So David sort of queued it up for us. We heard a really great panel by Sean and his panelists about innovation and the importance of it, and how even during the pandemic and in prior pandemic type situations, innovation has flourished. And now we have real investors on this roundtable. 3 different types of investors, I might note. Jack is a corporate venture capitalist, a little bit different emphasis. Bob is what I might call a more traditional venture capitalist. And Robert has an interesting affiliation with an incubator that gives him a deep dive look into very early stage ventures. So he's an early stage investor. And I just would like to ask everybody to describe what's the climate like today. Has anything changed since March or February, wherever you want to start? And I don't know who wants to start first. Bob, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to start and pass on to the other panelists. And I think we're in what I would call uncertain times. And the biggest risk right now is companies or projects that have started a direction that can be complicated in this time. So I think if you're doing large clinical trials, if you're doing trials in flu or other things related, those have largely come to a halt. Yet the burn rate for those companies hasn't come to a halt. So I think if there's the first thing that I think people are concerned with in today's environment is, when can we get back to conducting clinical trials, getting data, pushing drugs forward, whatever that might be in the projects. And they're looking for creative ways to do that, whether it's through different geographies than traditionally done, looking at Southern Hemisphere versus Northern Hemisphere, where the outbreak may be controlled. But I guess I would say, I don't think, I would look, the previous panel had a terrific public health perspective on it. We're in unprecedented times from the perspective of the coronavirus, and also, I hate to say it, but political leadership. We're not very unified in a lot of ways. So we don't really know what's going to happen. And I think that anybody that says they know what's going to happen is, with any degree of certainty, is not to be trusted. The only thing I can tell you with a certain degree of certainty is that funds that have raised money are going to invest them at some point. And so the money's going to be put to work. How that's going to be done, there may be a break in timing. People looked at the first quarter numbers and said things are on track. I don't think we're really going to see the results of this until we see projects that were in process. They got funded. Now we're looking at what became an in-process project during the coronavirus, post-March, whatever you want to call that. And I would say from our perspective at Alta, we are investors in Vir, which is an infectious disease company. I'm on the board of Vir. That's, it's taking an awful lot of time and commitment and thoughts right now to keep track of what's going on in the coronavirus space. So that's encompassing a lot of my time. But also you look at very practical things. Like if you have labs, do you have to expand your lab facilities? Do you have to rotate people through them? Just practical realities of what's going on now. And I think, there are a lot, people are inventive. I think people will come up with ways around this. I don't think the venture capitalists are going to dictate what's done, other than saying that looks like a good idea in our new reality. And I would say, gene therapy is, we've seen a lot of articles written that gene therapy is on a pause right now. Gene therapy is a terrific therapeutic area. It is a little bit on a pause in some ways right now. We had a flu program at Vir. We're not doing a flu trial right now. It seems like a ridiculous time to do it. So you sort of play the hand you're dealt, And ultimately, we're going to play for what the patients need. And that's ultimately what gets paid for, what these companies are in business to serve patients. So, we've seen a drastic, I'd say biotech has not seen a lot of impact in this relative to healthcare delivery. And healthcare delivery is shattered or changing. And, we can listen to the folks from UCSF or any other hospital or physician practice around the world. Things are going to change. And things have historically changed on reimbursement and what you get paid for. And we've seen big actions from CMS, for example, now of reimbursing for virtual visits. And, that's the single biggest thing I've seen out of this. We're going to see a lot of changes. And I think folks in biotech are largely stabilizing their portfolio to make sure that they can handle the burn rates that are going to be around with longer trials in oncology or gene therapy or whatever area it is. And we'll get back to normal at some point, but it's not normal now. And I would say we're looking for where the opportunities are that are presented by the new reality.
So just to comment on the UCSF comments that were made in the prior panel, that we're all going to stay in telehealth and so on and so forth. Clearly, our numbers went from something like 10% telehealth to 60% literally overnight, like in 2 weeks. And there's a huge burgeoning of telehealth applications, but it's not going to be everything. And we've reopened for business, and we're seeing patients again and doing surgeries and everything that needs to get done. So I don't want people to stop coming to UCSF. So just had to throw that in there since you mentioned it as well.
Well, I don't think people will stop coming. I think we're just going to have to re-gear for how things are done. And there will be some complementarity with, if you look at the big areas of healthcare, there's diagnostics. Diagnostics, I don't know how to judge in today's reality. Biotech, I think, is going to continue largely, it's been impacted more of a 6-month hiccup, but I think healthcare delivery is going to make dramatic changes. And I actually think largely for the better. And healthcare delivery has been based on you do what you get paid to do. When over the last 20 years in the United States, 30 years, you get paid to do procedures. And I think that, it's probably swung a little too much to pay for procedures. I'd love to see us paying for health and outcomes. So we'll see what happens.
Okay, let's switch to Jack. And why don't you speak from the perspective of Bayer and what you're investing in?
Well, I was trained as a for-profit VC, so I tend to think like that. So one of the big changes I've seen is the pre-money valuations coming down, which is nice. I think we had gotten a little ahead of our skis on some of these projects. The other big trend I would say is it's hard to do deals with people you don't know. So we've closed, one investment with a T-cell company that was, kind of on the books coming out of JPM last year, and probably close another 2 or 3 deals before the summer break. But most of these are with either firms or entrepreneurs we've worked with previously. So it's been a lot harder to evaluate projects, especially coming from Asia. Because of the language barrier, but now you have this barrier, you can't even meet the people physically. So that's been a notable change. I agree that companies have taken this opportunity to position themselves as COVID companies. So I've seen a lot on the antiviral space coming forward now. I even saw one, TNN K-cell company pitch themselves as a solution for COVID, which I don't think would work on a large scale. And so, there are clearly a lot of companies looking at, the pandemic as an opportunity to raise capital from interested parties. I'm cautioning most of the companies I work with away from that approach. I think by the time you actually get a therapy or even a project up and running, there will be a vaccine in the next year or two. So, it might be a way to raise capital near term, but I don't think it's going to be something you can actually tractably solve. I think
you're investing in non-COVID type deals, is that right? You
Correct.
Haven't just changed your focus completely.
Yeah, we are considering one COVID-like company. It's technology out of Harvard that's able to scan different TCRs to look for responses. to various epitopes, not just COVID, but COVID's one of the things they could go after. But I'm not changing my investment thesis around what I think is interesting. The one area where we have looked at a company recently is in the diagnostic space. So this was a company that makes an at-home flu diagnostic test. And they figured that they could also expand into COVID. So I think there is an ability to do at-home testing in a way that's not too expensive and burdensome. There would be a lot of people interested in technology, and it might be something that's critical to getting us back to work in the coming years.
Great. Okay, well, we'll come back to this diagnostics question, but let's let Robert speak a little bit about what he is seeing and what he's investing in.
Yeah, I mean, I think to echo what the other panelists have said, you know, it's venture capital is a people business, and you do need to get to know the people. It's critically important. You know, for us, we have the labs as a way to get to know the teams. We've closed several deals since the pandemic, but those, as Jack said, were actually deals that were already in progress. Things that we already knew. It was a matter of completing those deals. At the early stage investment side, we haven't yet seen a really big impact. And in part, that's because our companies, for the most part, are pretty clinical. We do have a couple of companies in our portfolio that are clinical, and those trials have been put on hold, and that will extend those companies' timelines. And it does mean that we have to reserve more money than we had planned originally for our portfolio. So I think in general, it's going to be harder for entrepreneurs to initiate new discussions with venture capitalists. At the early stage also, you know, we see a lot of dynamism because the companies have an opportunity to decide if they want to start a program that might be related to COVID-19. As investors, though, we wouldn't invest in a company that was solely addressing COVID-19. Because as Jack alluded to, the pandemic, the proximal pandemic will subside. The companies that we're interested in would have to have something that goes beyond just the current COVID-19 pandemic. You know, and to the question of labs and how do companies operate, we've been fortunate in being able to keep our labs operational throughout the pandemic. Being biomedical research centers, we've been largely exempt. We've had to put protocols in place so that researchers can operate safely, meaning maintaining distancing, face masks, asymptomatic. But if you've spent any time in the lab, you'll know that the labs, it's kind of remarkable, a lot of data analysis happens, but the labs themselves aren't that busy. There's a lot of setting up reactions, allowing them to incubate. So for the most part, we've been able to keep operations going. The lab pictured behind me in green screen is a lab that we just opened in May. So in the middle of the pandemic, we opened a lab. It's got space for 50 companies, and we already have 20 companies committed to move in. So I do agree with Bob, though, that long term, we don't quite know what the impact's going to be. In the near term, I think the momentum that we had coming into the pandemic, the nature of what's happening globally right now is it's a life science challenge. And I think there's a growing awareness that the solutions will come from the life sciences. And I think that's giving us some tailwind to push us through right now.
Great. On the topic of that your companies can still use the labs, one of our entrepreneurs told me that because he has access to his lab and nobody else really can come in, he's done 9 months of work in 2 months, and he's very happy about this. He's like, beating his milestones. Great, and I think you explained to people that the labs are what, and if you didn't, I'm just going to repeat it, that because you have labs available and you can get to see companies and get to know them over periods of time, that you can make an investment decision with having some really deep knowledge of how the company is progressing. And that sort of to the point that Jack and Bob made is like, well, we're not going to invest in entrepreneurs we've never met personally before. That's not your issue, Robert. Did I say that right?
Yeah, we almost 85% of our deals come through companies that we get to know through our labs. And it is an extended diligence process. For us, it's really gratifying because we get to be a place where entrepreneurs can come and get their companies going. We don't start the discussion with the venture capital side of our business. We start it with the incubator side of our business. How can we help you? And
Yeah, a very different model. Yeah, it's a great model. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone wants to run labs, but for those of us who do. So let's turn back to this. A couple of you mentioned diagnostics, and I'm curious as to, diagnostics have not been popular for venture investment. And that now all of a sudden diagnostics are critical to this whole COVID situation. So do you think that they're any more attractive now? And Bob, do you want to pick that up? Has it become a more interesting sector for venture to take a look at because of the heavy need of diagnostics, or not?
I mean, from my perspective, it's actually a very confusing landscape. Diagnostics has always been an oligopoly. It's been difficult. And I believe strongly in diagnostics, and it's important, and in many ways, it's the practice of medicine. I mean, that's the sleuthing that doctors do to find out if, what is causing the disease in the patient. And if you find it out, there's an associated treatment with that disease generally. But, I think diagnostics have taken a pretty good 1-2 punch with, Theranos muddying the water for a lot of people for many years. And now, to be honest with you, I think the diagnostics landscape, as much as we say we need diagnostics right now, we received at the Gates Foundation, we were working with UW to do a diagnostic. We received a cease and desist letter from the FDA. And as far as I can tell, it's political. They didn't want testing being done, because if you don't test, you don't have cases. And so, right now we've got licensed diagnostics for both the virus and for the antibody. There's not a lot of transparency on what a good test is. People are trying to find out. There are literally hundreds of tests out there. I don't know where diagnostics goes from here, to be honest with you. So and when I don't know where things are going, I don't generally invest. And I agree with both the panelists. I'm not actually looking to invest in things related to coronavirus. I'm on the board of Vir and Affinivax because we started them both 5 years ago, and they happen to be caught up in it, but that was by mistake.
Yeah. Why don't you give people 2 sentences on what Vir does and how they're playing?
Well, I started Vir with Bob Nelson at Arch and a few other people. It's basically to work on infectious diseases, and it came out of my spending time at the Gates Foundation and seeing that we needed to work on infectious diseases, but we didn't see any of this coming, and we were working on, flu and hepatitis B and things, a lot of things, but COVID.
And now what are you doing? What are you doing for COVID and Vir?
I can't say much, but we've got a couple antibodies in process and mostly working with the government, frankly, now. And this has become a government project, but a confusing, erratic government project.
Jeez. You hope that the country would get it together.
Jack, I do think there's been a lot of effort, and to credit Bill Gates, he's been talking about this for a long time, and other people have. And we invested in Moderna, and we invested in CureVac, and those are certainly 2 of the companies that are there. And they've also invested in Vir. So infectious disease is part of the future landscape. The question is always, in infectious disease, how does it get reimbursed? And historically, it's not been well. So,
Jack, you mentioned diagnostics before. Tell us more about your feeling.
Yeah, so it's just an observation. Obviously, I have young kids and a family that's very concerned about COVID, and people want to be tested. They want to know, if they take a trip. Certainly, I haven't been on a business trip since March, but I'm sure I'll get back on a plane sometime in the next month or 2. My wife is probably going to make me quarantine in my garage. So if I had the ability to get a test, quickly and easily, and even if the sensitivity and specificity aren't great, I think it would just give consumers some comfort about, return to normalcy. So when I think about testing recently, it's been more about, shifting the location of these tests from, either hospitals or, outpatient, kind of urgent care centers to either things that are at home or, maybe flu tests they have sometimes at Rite Aid and CVS, things like that. I think it's really more about shifting access and delivering the tests to a place where consumers can engage with them quickly, safely, and easily. So again, I'm not a diagnostics guy, never invested in a diagnostics company before, but I do see that trend, and there's at least one company on our radar that we're considering.
Okay,
Well,
cool.
and it's a great point. It's not just about point of care, it's about timing. I mean, I've been tested for coronavirus 4 times and have done a little bit of traveling. It's a 2-week turnaround time for a coronavirus test. That to me is functionally useless. Now, there are certain spots where it's a very quick turnaround time, but access has been terrible.
Yeah, well, we're all waiting for the saliva at-home test, right?
Be terrific.
Yeah, exactly. People are working on it, right? So let's change themes for a minute and talk about what you do like. So we're not just going to all pivot to COVID investments. What stands out as being interesting right now? What are the sectors or the indications? Is it gene therapy? Is it cell therapy? Is it aging? Is it immunology? What is it that people like? Who wants to jump in?
Yeah, I could give a start to that. I mean, for us at the earliest stages, we're still looking for companies looking to address some real steep technical risk. So these would typically be novel targets that aren't yet well validated, but if they have the ability to generate data that then validates those targets, those become interesting. Oncology has been an area that we've invested in generally, but I would say immunology is an autoimmune disease. That's a emerging area for us.
Okay, great. Who else? Jack? What do
Yeah,
you
I would say that immunology does appear to be an area that's been underinvested over the last decade or so. So we're looking at a few companies in that space. Cancer continues to be attractive, so we do a lot of oncology deals. I don't expect that will stop. I guess one strategy I've been investigating more, there's been a number of oncolytic virus companies that have failed over the years, but no one's really tried an oncolytic gene therapy where you're really not just focusing on the virus killing the tumor, but actually deploying a payload that can help to attract the immune system. So I think oncology will stay hot, but maybe looking at some new ways to tweak the paradigm for cell and gene therapy there.
I'd say that I just have 2 comments on this. One, I look at areas, but I mostly look at investing in people, and I hope smart people come up with good areas to invest in. So, and I think, we've touched on this, but one of the really damaging things of the pandemic is actually to young scientists or young entrepreneurs or I probably don't need to be out, because I'm getting older. I don't need to be out on planes all the time beating the bushes for people to be able to reach me. But if you're a young person trying to build a career, whether that's as a scientist or as a young venture capitalist or whatever it is, you got to get out and meet people. You got to interact. You've got to make your case. And I think it's difficult in today's environment. If you're a young entrepreneur, you haven't started a company before, getting out in front of the 3 of us and making a case when we don't have a relationship, or it's difficult to build a relationship. That's the tragedy of what's going on right now. So I would never invest money in somebody I don't know. And it's hard to get to know people right now. So I tend to be, I invested in Todd Harris's new company, and it's an oncology company, but it's because I've done a company with him already. And I'm about to do another investment in somebody that I've already invested. So to a certain extent, it's the same thing that's going on an economy basis. The rich are getting richer. The folks that are, well established, if George Church calls me or Vicky Sato calls me, I have a relationship and I'm going to return that call, and it's going to be easy to build on. If young, great researcher out of UCSF calls me, it's going to be, I'd love to get to know you in the fall. Yeah.
That's tough. So even if I introduce that young researcher from UCSF and say, this is someone you should talk to, you're going to be, I'll take that first call, but it's going to take a long time for me to get to know them.
I think the time aspect is right. I think it's still possible. I'm just sort of mentally going through, as I said in the beginning, we closed some deals, but they were ones that were already in progress. But we do have some new deals that we're working on now. And one of them was one that we've never met in person. It's taking a little bit longer because we're needing to do more through Zoom, but I do think it's possible that, as Bob says, it's going to slow things down. There's no question about it.
Yeah. Any advice for our young new entrepreneurs? How can they make this better? Is there anything they can do? Or just hang on and wait a year?
For us, it's simple. We offer lab space, and we offer it first before investment. So, come get a lab bench, get going. Getting operational is hugely beneficial. So if you're a company that only has a presentation, it's going to take you a lot longer. If you're a company that has a presentation and you're actually conducting experiments as an independent researcher outside of the academy, it gives you a lot more momentum.
Yeah. Bob, any advice for these young researchers?
Look, I think the great thing here is persistence pays off, and there are different times for different events, but it's going to take some work, and it's not easy. I've never been one to invest necessarily in science or in areas necessarily. We invest in, our threshold at Alta is we want to do cures. We want to do curative therapeutics. We don't want to do treatments. We want to do symptom amelioration. And I think that's largely because it makes trials easier if you have a cure, and it makes reimbursement discussions easier. But, so I'd say, but I also, 3 of the last 4 entrepreneurs I've invested in were under 30 years old. So, I actually like the young enthusiastic. I love being involved in that process and people growing, but they've got to get good mentors. And I think it's incredibly valuable to be in an incubation space, not just for the space, but because you're exposed to a lot of other people from a mentorship standpoint and learning. And it's not just science, and it's not just business, and it's not just the ability to raise capital. You're going to face a lot of different challenges over the years. And we're looking for resilient, persistent people that are going to walk through walls. They're going to make appropriate decisions. This is a judgment business. People that are going to surround themselves with great folks that complement them. All those things are really important.
So maybe the advice to a young entrepreneur is keep at it, get to know Bob best you can in the limited technology ability. And when things open up, then you'll get to know him. And then maybe in 2 years, he'll invest.
Well, I not necessarily. First of all, there's a lot of funding sources out there. There's a lot of creativity. So I wouldn't necessarily focus on any one person, but you're going to find somebody whose your long-term objectives are aligned with theirs. And I'd say that alignment is huge in this business. And people will turn things down for a lot of different reasons. But to me, this is absolutely a people relationships business. You want to get to know people over time. You want to do what you say you're going to do. And it's pretty much that simple. But I think the proliferation of incubation spaces I'd say this is version 2.0. People were doing this back in the early 90s, not as well. Now I think they're, folks like Robert are doing this in such an effective way, and they're making great use of resources. And the cost of starting up has come down so much that you can get results, or at least hints at results and pointing in direction pretty effectively. And then you have a lot more to show people sooner. So it's a terrific opportunity. I'd get to know other other CEOs in the business and beg, steal, and borrow from them.
Great. Jack, weigh in here. What do we tell our young scientists, entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I would echo those sentiments. I think you have to get out of the academic bubble, get into one of these collab spaces. They were some of the first areas to open up. Everyone's still social distancing, but it's a great place to build your network. As Bob was alluding to, there are lots of first-time CEOs, people that are still in that same fundraising mode. So you can get introductions and share network with them. But I think it's really important just to get started. It's always going to be a slog, and it's always going to take persistence. So if I was starting a company, I wouldn't let COVID stop me. I would just get out and do it.
All right. Spoken like an entrepreneur. Any questions from the audience? So we could take a couple of questions now. And if not, I'm just going to ask everyone on the panel. So if you're projecting to the end of 2020, you know how many deals you did last year, 3, 4, 1, whatever. What's it going to look like this year, given everything, everything that everything that that's external to you? What do you think this year is going to look like? Robert, why don't you start?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think there, as I think we all mentioned, there was quite a lot of momentum. It's only been a couple months now. So if I look at our deal flow and the deals we've closed thus far, I would say we're on pace to close the same number of deals. But to Bob's earlier comments, I don't think we quite have felt the full impact now. So I would say it would be lower. At the end of the day, our job as venture capitalists is to smartly invest our limited partners' capital, and that will continue to be our job. So we need to find good deals, and we're going to be active regardless.
And since you invest in therapeutics and the clinical trial thing is an issue, are you feeling like there is going to be some sort of workaround and if you need to do clinical trials?
Yeah, it's still an open question. I mean, the clinical trials, at some point, those people will need to understand that they need to open up the trials again, because otherwise we'll have a gap in new therapies emerging.
Yeah.
As I said, for us, we're fortunate that relatively few companies in our portfolio are clinical stage. So we're not, as on a portfolio basis, we're not that exposed to it right now.
Yeah, great. Okay, Bob?
Look, my fear is controlling your own destiny as these companies. And if you get yourself in a place where your burn rate exceeds the ability to raise capital, you're exposed. And that happens. And I think we will see in that event, you'll see some consolidation. I think, gene therapy is such a manufacturing based business right now with the ability to manufacture. That requires sizable investments, and not everybody's going to be able to raise that. There may be very good technologies but there's going to be some consolidators out there as well. So I just don't know how the landscape holds up. Our job as a community, as a scientific community, is to keep pushing things forward. Now, whether it's what name is on the door at the end of the day, I don't know. There's going to be opportunistic buying by pharma or by large biotechs, and that's great. But the job of entrepreneurs is to push new science forward, innovate, and I think they're going to continue to do that. And I think there will be workarounds, and I love some of the things I'm seeing in our portfolio already, where they're doing virtual chemistry in other countries, or they're doing they're shifting where they're going to do their clinical trials. That becomes an opportunity for different geographies.
Yeah, great. And you mentioned pharma. Are they still out there looking at deals of various sorts, partnerships, or are they sort of faded into the background?
No, pharma's still very active. I think, like everyone, just not being able to travel has changed the cadence. A lot of these meetings like bio are now virtual, and it's just a different experience when you're doing everything over a Zoom or a telechat. Leaps had a very big year last year. We did 14 deals, deployed something like 250 million. It would have been impossible for us to keep up that pace regardless of COVID, but I think things are going to be a lot slower this year. Funds have been able to raise capital, so that hasn't been a problem. Companies have been able to IPO, so there's still exits. We've even seen some M&A, but most of the venture folks I've talked to, they're a little bit more concerned about their portfolio. They want to make sure they have enough dry powder to fund their companies. As Robert and Bob alluded to, we're going to see a data crunch in the next 6 to 12 months. And so a lot of these companies that would have been coming from a position of strength with great data to go out and do a raise at a step-up valuation are now going to be, out raising money at flat, or maybe, God forbid, even down rounds. So I think a lot of venture funds, even though they've been able to raise capital and they're still getting exits and IPOs, are being a little bit more conservative about how they deploy that capital, and just making sure they have enough to support their existing portfolio if they need to.
To big pharma's credit, I actually think big pharma and big biotech is very active in the deal side of things right now, and I can't figure out if it's because it's opportunity or the CEOs are sitting on board. But
well, it's also
a lot of deals are getting done.
Deals are a lot easier when interest rates are this low.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So stuff's happening, and I think you'll continue to see the ecosystem, like you see. You'll see a lot of innovation at the biotech side, but I also think pharma's getting more nimble. They're focusing on their projects. And I don't think there's anything wrong with what's going on right now. And I think it's viewed much more as a partnership than an us versus them. We work with corporate VCs all the time. It's terrific. So we're working all over. So the spectrum has come together. People are dialoguing, but I do think still at the end of the day, it's about relationships and trust, and that makes things a lot easier.
Great. Well, so now maybe being on this panel with Jack, you were going to find a Leaps and Alta deal coming up.
Absolutely.
You never know. I think we're just about out of time. And so before I thank the panel, I just want to mention that we are starting a global online entrepreneurship class for life science healthcare. So if you want to hear more like these wonderful investors I've got on this panel, this class is an opportunity to dial in from any place in the world and hear people from Silicon Valley and speak about how we do things here and why we've been so successful and how to create a business plan and translate science out into the real world. So if you want to learn more about that, you can look at innovation.ucsf.edu and find the class and sign up to pre-register. So
I just add to that, I think that's a great idea. And the more exposure you get to different people, and actually, frankly, people that are different than yourselves, I want to work with corporate VCs. I want to work with, as I'm getting older in this, the energy and scientific innovation and can do that young folks bring to this, and also then sitting with people like George and Vicky at Veer, there's wily veterans and there are people that know, and the best outcome is when you put people with different experiences, different backgrounds together to push one another. And I think that's terrific. And I see that my two panelists here, it's, we're all coming at the same thing from different areas.
Yeah.
And that makes for stronger companies.
It's this diversity of thinking and experience that really matters. And when we do the class, we'll have about 20 guest lecturers from the Valley, and they all have a different perspective on how to do a company. And then we'll set up forums so people can together speak about whatever they want to. But you could have somebody from Chile talking to somebody in Tokyo. And it really opens up the world. So that's one good thing about all this online stuff. Anyway, I want to thank the panel. Great job, panel. Thank
you. Thank you a lot. Thank you, Stephanie from UCSF, for leading the discussion. Thank you so much, Jack, Bob, Robert. It was wonderful to hear the insights, the investment trends. It's also was nice to hear that the investment focus is not limited to resolving the effects after the COVID. So it's a kind of positive news. We are moving to a next session, and I'm calling for the speakers of the next roundtable. And the next discussion will be led by Daniel Teo, founding partner at